The woman standing in my driveway wasn't just angry, she was exploding. Clipboard in one hand, finger jabbing at the air, voice shrieking the same word over and over again like a broken siren. Illegal! Illegal. According to her, my dream farmhouse, the place I'd worked years to finally buy, was under her control. And I owed her compliance, fines, and paperwork. Right now. Here's the twist. I spent months making sure this property was not in an HOA. County records, attorney letters, even the original 1800s land grant. Every document screamed the same truth. I was free. But none of that mattered to her. She stormed across my lawn like a self-appointed sheriff, declaring herself the president of an HOA that had absolutely no authority here. When I calmly pulled out my folder of legal proof, she didn't back down. She got louder. Her eyes narrowed, and with each second, her claims grew more outrageous, as if shouting could rewrite the law. What happened next turned an ordinary move-in day into the fight of my life against a woman who would rather rewrite reality than admit she was wrong. For as long as I can remember, I dreamed of one thing: peace. Not the fake peace where every little decision has to pass through a committee. Not the kind of peace where some neighbor with a title and a clipboard dictates what color my shutters can be or how tall my grass can grow. I mean real peace, the kind that comes from waking up every morning, looking out over open land, and knowing no one else gets to control how I live. That's why this farmhouse isn't just a house. It's a promise I made to myself years ago. A promise that one day I'd escape the endless rules and petty politics of homeowner associations. You see, I'm not someone who takes decisions lightly. I'm an engineer by trade. My whole life revolves around research, details, evidence, and making sure every single thing checks out before I sign on the dotted line. So when I say I spent months researching this place, I mean months. I combed through county records, tax surveys, title insurance. I spoke to not one, not two, but 3 different attorneys, each confirming the same thing: this property. This 1,800-square-foot farmhouse with its creaky porch and wide front yard stood proudly outside the jurisdiction of any HOA. Even the original 1870s land grant confirmed it. That kind of history doesn't lie. So when I pulled up with a moving truck on that crisp September morning, the sun warming my face, boxes stacked high in the driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Judy, my wife, was inside unpacking the kitchen while I carried the heavier boxes. She smiled every time I passed by, both of us grinning like kids because after 3 years of saving, planning, and dreaming, we had finally arrived. That's when I first noticed her, a woman in her late 40s, striding across the property line like she owned the very ground beneath her feet. She wasn't dressed casually like a neighbor coming to say hello. No, she wore the kind of blazer you put on when you want people to take you seriously. Clipboard clutched in one hand, a manila folder in the other. Her pace was sharp and deliberate, like a drill sergeant about to deliver orders. For half a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a friendly neighbor coming to welcome us with information about the area, or perhaps even baked cookies. But my gut told me something was off, and then she spoke. "Sir," she announced, her chin tilted high, "I am Karen Mitchell, president of Maplewood Heights HOA. This property requires immediate compliance with community standards." Just like that. No hello, no welcome, no smile. Her words weren't neighborly, they were a demand. And the way she said it, like she'd practiced that speech in the mirror 100 times. I stood there, still holding a box, staring at her like she'd just told me my farmhouse had secretly sprouted wings and flown into another dimension. "Excuse me?" I asked, carefully setting the box down. "You heard me," she snapped, squaring her shoulders. "This property is subject to Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association jurisdiction. You need to submit compliance paperwork, architectural review forms, and an initial fine for violations. Effective immediately. Her tone wasn't just firm. It was the kind of tone used by people who've never once questioned whether they actually have the authority they claim. Now here's the thing. I respect authority. Real authority. Police officers, county officials, judges, people with actual legal power. But this was a woman with a clipboard pretending her word alone was law, so I did what any reasonable, fact-driven person would do. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe boundaries had shifted. Maybe a zoning change had slipped through. Maybe there was something I had missed in all my research. "Ma'am," I said politely, "I appreciate your concern, but this farmhouse is outside your HOA boundaries. I have comprehensive documentation that proves it." That's when I went to the truck, reached into the front seat, and pulled out my thick folder, the one I had prepared like a student gearing up for the hardest exam of his life. Inside were county maps, surveys, title documents, legal opinions, all confirming the independence of my farmhouse. I offered the folder to her. "Here, you can see for yourself." And that's when her professional smile turned into something sharper. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight, and her entire posture changed. "Your documentation is incorrect," she barked. "This property has been in violation for years." The certainty in her voice almost made me doubt myself for half a second. Almost. But then I remembered the countless nights I'd spent hunched over county databases, the 3 lawyers I'd paid to verify, the historical land grant I'd held in my hands. No, she was wrong. What threw me wasn't just her claim. It was how quickly she dismissed evidence without even glancing at it. She barely skimmed the first page before shaking her head. "Outdated records," she declared, waving her manila folder like it was the Constitution itself. "I have current HOA authority maps, but here's where my engineer's brain kicked in." Her papers? At first glance, sure, they looked official. But on closer inspection, the colors were off. The seals looked too perfect, like they'd been designed on a home computer. The fonts didn't match standard government formatting. To me, it was like looking at a bad fake ID, impressive to someone who didn't know what to look for, but flimsy under real scrutiny. That's the moment Judy stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel, curious about the raised voices. Her eyes went straight to the woman's folder. My wife's a high school teacher, which means she has a built-in radar for spotting fake assignments and plagiarized work. And the look on her face said it all. She wasn't buying this for a second. "These look like copies," Judy said bluntly. "Where are the originals?" And just like that, the mask slipped. Karen's voice shot up several octaves as she snapped back, "Illegal questioning of HOA authority. Residents don't interrogate board decisions." I blinked. Illegal? Since when was asking to see original documents a crime? At that moment, I realized something. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a simple boundary dispute. This was a woman so wrapped up in her own fabricated authority that she'd rather shout illegal than face the fact she had no control here. And that's when things really started to spiral. Karen stood in my driveway like she was the queen of the county, clutching that manila folder like it was the sword of truth. Her words came sharp, fast, and louder with every sentence, as if volume alone could bend reality into her favor. "Your documentation is irrelevant," she snapped. "Maplewood Heights HOA has jurisdiction over this property, and you are in serious violation." Her certainty would have been impressive if it weren't so completely baseless. I held the folder of my official documents tighter, resisting the urge to laugh at the absurdity. Irrelevant? These were county-issued records, historical deeds, and attorney-verified surveys. If these were irrelevant, then what exactly did she think her color-copied papers were? But here's the thing about power dynamics. It's not always about who's right. It's about who's louder, who's more confident, and who's willing to bulldoze the other person into submission. And at that moment, Karen wasn't just trying to argue, she was trying to dominate. She stepped closer, closing the gap between us until she was barely 3 feet away. Her eyes locked on mine, unblinking, like she expected me to break under her stare. Judy shifted on the porch, clearly uncomfortable, but Karen didn't so much as glance at her. Her entire focus was on me, the new homeowner who, in her mind, needed to be put in his place. Non-compliance affects everyone's property values, she barked, pacing slightly like a politician giving a speech. Do you think you're above the rules? Do you think you can just waltz in here and ignore community standards? That's not how it works here. The words hit me in a strange way, not because I believed them, but because of the way she delivered them, like I had already been found guilty and was now standing in front of a judge waiting for sentencing. This was no friendly, neighborly chat. This was a power play. Here's the unsettling truth about situations like this. Most people, when confronted by someone claiming authority, fold. They pay the fine. They sign the paper. They nod and comply just to avoid conflict. Human beings are wired to trust authority figures, even fake ones. Karen knew that. She leaned into it. Every gesture, every word was carefully chosen to project dominance. The squared shoulders, the clipped official tone, the constant use of legal buzzwords. She wasn't just arguing. She was performing, and I'll admit for the first few minutes, she almost had me second-guessing myself. When someone throws the word illegal in your face enough times, it starts to seep into your brain. But here's where she miscalculated. I'm not the kind of man who takes words at face value. I deal in proof, in verifiable evidence. I believe in facts. So, while she ramped up her intimidation tactics, my brain was already dissecting the situation like a puzzle. The fake seals on her papers, the inconsistent fonts, the way she avoided even glancing at my official records. All of it screamed one word: fraud. Karen must have sensed she wasn't getting the immediate obedience she wanted. Because her tactics shifted, she stopped shouting about property values and started threatening consequences. You'll be fined daily, she declared. Non-compliance fees, architectural review penalties, landscaping citations, you name it. And if you don't pay, the HOA has authority to place a lien on your property. We can force foreclosure if necessary. She said it so smoothly, like she'd delivered that exact line dozens of times before. Like this was her ace card, the threat that usually made people cave. But I wasn't caving. Ma'am, I said evenly. This farmhouse is outside your HOA. You cannot place a lien on something you have no jurisdiction over. Her nostrils flared. She jabbed the clipboard at me like a weapon. Don't you dare challenge HOA authority, she hissed. You think your little folder of papers means anything? Those are outdated. My documents are current. She slapped her manila folder against her palm for emphasis, then held it up as if I was supposed to bow before it. That's when Judy spoke up again. Calm, steady, but with that teacher's edge in her voice. Then show us the originals, she said. If your documents are real, prove it. Karen whirled on her like a hawk spotting prey. You don't question board authority, she shrieked. That is illegal. There it was again. That word she clung to like a lifeline, illegal. She wielded it like a magic spell, as if saying it loudly enough made it true. But the more she repeated it, the clearer it became that she didn't actually understand what the word meant. Because asking for proof? That's not illegal. That's common sense. I realized something important in that moment. Karen didn't just believe she had authority. She needed it. This wasn't about property lines or paperwork. This was about control, about feeding some deep-rooted need to feel powerful, and she was willing to twist reality itself to get it. That's why she never looked at my evidence, why she kept repeating illegal like a mantra, why she escalated every time someone challenged her. For Karen, this wasn't a dispute. It was a performance of power, and performances thrive on audience compliance. The imbalance was obvious. She had her clipboard, her staged documents, her booming voice. I had the truth. But truth doesn't always carry the same weight in the heat of conflict. Most people in my shoes would have felt cornered, pressured into submission. But here's the part Karen didn't anticipate. I wasn't most people. I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the facts. Karen, I said firmly, this property is not under your HOA. I have documents verified by the county, by attorneys, and by historical land records. Your folder doesn't change that. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Just a flicker, but I saw it, the flash of uncertainty in her eyes. And then, just as quickly, she buried it under more bluster. You have 24 hours, she announced dramatically, her voice rising again. Submit compliance paperwork or face enforcement. With that, she spun on her heel and marched away, muttering, Illegal! Illegal, under her breath like a protective charm against reality. I stood there in the driveway, heart pounding, not from fear but from the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Here I was, holding legal proof in my hands, and somehow this woman had managed to twist the situation into a battle of wills. That's the dangerous thing about people like her. They don't need to be right to make your life miserable. They just need to be loud enough, confident enough, and relentless enough to make you doubt yourself. But as she disappeared down the street, her heels clicking like gavel strikes, I felt a surge of determination. She had picked the wrong person to mess with, because I wasn't going to fold. I was going to fight. And here's where the imbalance truly sets in. On paper, I had every advantage: legal ownership, verified documents, official boundaries. But in practice, Karen had the social weaponry. She had the performance, the voice that could carry across fences, the threats that sounded terrifying to anyone unfamiliar with property law. That's why people like her succeed. They prey on fear, on the average homeowner's lack of knowledge about boundaries and legal jargon. They know most folks won't dig through land grants or hire attorneys to check every detail. They exploit that imbalance. And standing there in my driveway, watching her march off with her fake folder, I realized something chilling. I wasn't her first target. I was just the first one who dared to push back. As the September sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the farmhouse, Judy came down the steps and slipped her hand into mine. She's not going to stop, she said quietly. And she was right. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the opening round. Karen wasn't walking away defeated. She was regrouping, planning her next move. And I knew from the fire in her eyes that when she came back, it would be louder, nastier, and far more dangerous. That's when I decided, if she wanted a war of authority, I'd be ready. Because in this battle of truth versus delusion, I wasn't about to let her win. What Karen did next made me realize this wasn't just a neighborly spat. It was the start of a full-scale battle. She thought intimidation would break me, but instead, it exposed her biggest weakness. And when I discovered the evidence she accidentally dropped, everything about this fight changed. The quiet of the farmhouse didn't last long. I should have known it wouldn't. Karen wasn't the type to storm off in defeat and let things go. No, people like her feed on conflict, and the more resistance they meet, the louder they become. Sure enough, the very next morning I woke to the sound of banging on metal. My mailbox. By the time I stepped outside, Karen was already standing there, clipboard in hand, slapping a bright orange notice onto it like she was a law enforcement officer serving a warrant. Failure to comply. Illegal occupation. Immediate penalties, she announced, loud enough for the entire street to hear. I felt heat rise in my chest, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. I walked up slowly, reading the so-called violation. And let me tell you, even at first glance, it was laughable. The formatting was off. The official seal looked like something copied from a Google image search. The text included phrases no legitimate government agency would ever use, like community illegality report. Karen, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, you do not have jurisdiction here. This farmhouse is not part of your HOA. I've got county documentation, legal opinions, and historic deeds to prove it. She didn't even flinch. Outdated! All of it outdated, she snapped, waving her manila folder again. These are the current records. I glanced at the paper she clutched like it was scripture. The fonts didn't even match. The supposed boundary map was printed on cheap office paper, the ink slightly smudged. My engineering-trained eye caught every flaw instantly. But here's the thing. Karen wasn't trying to win with facts. She was trying to win with force. Every time I questioned her, she barked the same word. Illegal. Karen, your seal doesn't match county formatting. Illegal. These fines aren't recognized by the county or state. Illegal. Your own HOA office can confirm I'm not part of your jurisdiction. Illegal. It was absurd. She was using the word like duct tape, slapping it over every hole in her argument, hoping it would hold. But the more she said it, the more unhinged she sounded, and the worst part? Neighbors had started gathering. A couple across the street paused their morning jog to watch. An older man leaned on his rake, frowning. Even Judy peeked out from the porch, shaking her head. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just trying to intimidate me. She was performing for an audience, hoping the sheer volume of her confidence would make me look like the unreasonable one. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen announced dramatically, turning to face the onlookers like a politician on the campaign trail. This man thinks he can defy the rules that protect all of us. He thinks he can endanger our property values. He thinks he's above the law! Gasps, murmurs. That's the power of performance. Even when the facts are on your side, the appearance of authority can sway people. Karen was exploiting that imbalance to the fullest. I wanted to shout the truth, to hold up my folder of real documents for everyone to see, but I knew yelling wouldn't win this battle. If anything, it would just make me look as unhinged as her. So I steadied myself. Karen, I said firmly, if you're so confident, let's settle this right now. We'll call the county planning office. They'll confirm the property boundaries in minutes. Her response was immediate and panicked. County records are irrelevant. HOA authority supersedes all other documentation. I blinked. Did she just claim her HOA had more power than the county? That's like saying the local book club outranks the Supreme Court. The joggers frowned. The man with the rake shook his head. Even some of Karen's audience was starting to doubt her. Her face flushed red. Her voice cracked with strain. But she doubled down, jabbing her finger in my face. You have 24 hours to submit compliance paperwork or face formal enforcement. Do you understand me? Her whole body vibrated with rage, her words punctuated by the rhythmic thump of her clipboard smacking against her palm. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to expose her, a single sheet of paper slipped out of her manila folder and fluttered to the ground. She didn't notice. But I did. I bent down and picked it up. It wasn't an official map. It wasn't a government record. It was a receipt from a local print shop. 20 copies, HOA boundary update, 87 of 50, time-stamped yesterday. I looked at the receipt, then at her, then back at the receipt. Karen, I said slowly, you had these printed yesterday. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her eyes darted just for a second before she snatched the receipt out of my hand. That's none of your business, she snapped, stuffing it back into her folder. Illegal. That's private property. You can't touch my documents. But it was too late. The damage was done. I knew the truth now. And so did the neighbors who had caught a glimpse of the paper before she snatched it back. Her empire of lies was starting to crumble. Later that day, as I was unloading the last of the moving boxes, my neighbor Bob Wilson strolled over. A retired military man in his 60s, Bob carried himself with the calm authority of someone who had seen his share of nonsense. "You met our neighborhood scammer," he said dryly. "Excuse me?" I asked. Bob leaned on the fence and lowered his voice. "Karen's been pulling this stunt for months. Targets new homeowners who don't know the boundaries. Finds them for fake violations, collects the money, then disappears. Happened to me once. $60 for a mailbox height violation. Never again." My stomach turned. "She's been doing this to others." Bob nodded grimly. "Half the street knows. Most just pay to avoid the drama, but looks like you're not the type to roll over." He was right. I wasn't. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me or my farmhouse. Karen had built an entire operation out of intimidation and fake paperwork. She wasn't a confused neighbor. She was a con artist, weaponizing fear, exploiting trust, and bullying people into handing her money. The receipt from the print shop wasn't just evidence. It was the first crack in her armor, and if I could widen that crack, her whole facade would collapse. But I also knew one thing for certain. Karen wasn't going to go quietly. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. "Final warning," Karen's voice barked on the other end. "Submit compliance paperwork and pay the $200 fee by tomorrow or face legal enforcement." I almost laughed. She'd escalated from fake notices to outright extortion, but I didn't laugh. Not yet, because I knew this was bigger than me now. She was preying on others, scamming neighbors, and counting on fear to protect her. What she didn't know was that I was documenting everything, every notice, every threat, every lie, and soon her entire scheme would come crashing down. What I discovered about Karen's so-called documents left me stunned, and it proved she was running a full-blown scam. When I set a trap to catch her red-handed, the footage I recorded was more disturbing than I ever imagined. And when the police finally got involved, Karen's meltdown became the stuff of legend. The farmhouse was supposed to be my sanctuary, but within just days of moving in, it felt like a battlefield. Karen had turned my dream into a stage for her one-woman show of control, screaming illegal at every turn, plastering bogus notices, and calling neighbors to watch her spectacle. And yet, even with all her noise, something still gnawed at me. It wasn't enough to know she was wrong. I needed to prove it, not just to myself, but to everyone who had been bullied into silence before me. That's when the revelation came. It all started with that receipt, the one Karen accidentally dropped in my driveway. I couldn't stop thinking about it. A time-stamped order from a local print shop, 20 copies of HOA Boundary Update. On the surface, it was just a scrap of paper, but in reality, it was a trail that could lead directly back to the truth. That night, while Judy organized boxes inside, I sat at the dining table with the receipt laid flat in front of me. I traced the ink with my finger, thinking like an investigator. If Karen had fake documents printed, then someone else had seen them too. Someone had pressed print. Someone had taken her money, and maybe, just maybe, that person had kept a record. The next morning, I drove into town and walked into the small office supply and print shop listed on the receipt. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. A young man behind the counter looked up from his laptop. "Morning," he said. I slid the receipt across the counter. "Hey, this was printed here yesterday, right?" He glanced at it and nodded. "Yeah, I remember. Lady came in with a USB stick, wanted 20 copies. Real insistent about the colors." My pulse quickened. "What exactly did she print?" He tilted his head like he was trying to recall. Then his eyes lit with recognition. "Boundary maps. Said they were for some official HOA enforcement." But honestly, looked like something anyone could whip up in Photoshop. "Did she give you her name?" I asked carefully. He smirked. "Didn't have to. She repeated it 5 times. President Karen Mitchell, Maplewood Heights HOA. Trust me, I won't forget. There it was. The smoking gun. Not just my word against hers, but a third-party witness confirming she had fabricated the so-called official documents. I thanked him and left, my heart pounding. Back at the farmhouse, I spread everything out on the table. The fake notices, the orange violation stickers, the boundary map with its smudged ink, and now the receipt from the print shop. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Karen wasn't confused about the boundaries. She wasn't misinformed. She was deliberately manufacturing false documents to trick new homeowners, and worse, she was profiting from it. Bob, my neighbor, had already confirmed she'd scammed him for $60. But how many others had fallen for it? How much money had she pocketed, all under the guise of protecting property values? The realization hit me like a thunderclap. Karen wasn't just a nuisance, she was running a racket. Judy leaned over my shoulder, scanning the evidence with her sharp teacher's eye. "You can't keep this between us," she said firmly. "She's been doing this to others. People are afraid of her because she screams and throws around the word illegal. But if you expose this, you won't just protect us. You'll protect everyone." Her words lit a fire in me. I wasn't just defending my farmhouse anymore. I was standing up for every person who had been bullied, fined, or threatened into submission. But exposing Karen wouldn't be easy. People like her thrive on denial. She'd scream fake at any evidence, twist reality to protect her empire. So, I decided to set a trap. I installed 2 discreet security cameras, one on the porch, one facing the driveway. If Karen came back with her clipboard and bogus notices, I'd have it all on tape. Every threat, every illegal, every fabricated fine. Sure enough, I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, right on cue, she marched across the property line again. Same blazer, same manic energy. She taped another bright orange notice to my door, loudly proclaiming, "Illegal occupancy." What she didn't know was that my cameras were rolling. I watched from inside as she rifled through her folder, pulling out another boundary map. This time, she even tried to wedge it under my welcome mat, like some twisted Easter egg. Then, in the most incriminating move of all, she pulled out her phone and staged evidence photos. She snapped pictures of my lawn, my porch, even the siding of my farmhouse. And then, this was the kicker, she wrote notes on her clipboard labeling them as violations. Violations of what? No one knew. Not even her. But now, I had her recorded in high definition. That night, I quietly showed the footage to Bob and a few other neighbors I trusted. Their reactions were telling. "That's exactly what she did to me," one woman whispered. "She took pictures of my garden and fined me for having the wrong plants. I paid because I thought she could actually hurt me." Another man shook his head. "She told me my fence was 2 inches too tall. Charged me a $100 fine. I paid just to get her off my back." As story after story poured out, the picture became clear. Karen had been running her scam for years. She wasn't just the self-appointed queen of Maplewood Heights. She was the self-appointed tax collector, and nobody had dared to stop her. Until now. The final piece of the puzzle came when I dug deeper into county records one more time. This time I wasn't just looking at maps. I looked at the HOA itself, and what I found nearly made me laugh out loud. Maplewood Heights. HOA had been dissolved 3 years ago. That's right. The official HOA had collapsed after a lawsuit over mismanagement. Karen wasn't even president of anything. The HOA didn't exist. Everything, her title, her documents, her fines, wasn't just fake. It was impossible. She wasn't just a fraud. She was the ghost of an HOA that no longer existed. The neighbors I showed this to were stunned. Some angry, some relieved. But all of them finally saw the truth. Karen wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was exploiting it. Armed with my evidence, footage, documents, receipts, and county records, I knew the end game was near. But exposing someone like Karen isn't clean. It's messy. Because when a person builds their entire identity on power, they don't go down quietly. And Karen? She was about to explode in ways none of us could have predicted. What Karen did when she realized her entire HOA was fake will leave you speechless. When I finally confronted her with the evidence, her meltdown made everything before look tame. And when the police and the real county officials got involved, Karen's empire of lies came crashing down. By the time a week had passed, my farmhouse no longer felt like the peaceful escape I'd dreamed about. It felt like a courtroom, and Karen had declared herself judge, jury, and executioner. Every day she marched across the property line, clipboard in hand, armed with new violations. And every day, I collected more evidence, video recordings, false notices, even the time-stamped receipt from the print shop. But it wasn't enough to have the truth. The truth had to be shown, exposed, broadcast so widely that Karen couldn't spin her way out of it. So I planned the confrontation. It started with the neighbors. Bob Wilson and the others who had shared their stories with me agreed. Enough was enough. They were tired of Karen screaming, her fake fines, her reign of intimidation. So together we organized a community meeting, right on neutral ground, the grassy patch by the cul-de-sac. Word spread fast. By the evening of the meeting, nearly 20 households had gathered. Some brought lawn chairs, others stood with folded arms. The tension was thick, buzzing through the air like static before a storm, and then, right on cue, Karen arrived. Clipboard under her arm, folder clutched like a holy book. Blazer buttoned tight as if she were about to give a State of the Union address. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the crowd, "thank you for assembling. I have urgent business regarding a resident who is in violation of Maplewood Heights HOA regulations." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. She didn't waste a second, pointed her finger straight at me. "This man has refused to comply. He is illegally occupying his property, ignoring regulations, and endangering our community's property values. Effective immediately, I am issuing a motion for fines and enforcement." She looked around triumphantly, expecting nods, support, obedience. But this time, she wasn't the only one with a folder. I stepped forward, calm but steady, holding my binder of documents. Judy stood at my side, her presence quiet but powerful. Her eyes locked on Karen with the same resolve I felt in my bones. "Karen," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you've made a lot of claims, but tonight the truth comes out." I pulled out the first sheet, a county map stamped and signed, showing the official HOA boundaries. My farmhouse was clearly outside them. "This is from the county planning office," I explained. "It proves beyond doubt that my property is not under HOA jurisdiction." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Outdated," she barked. "Those are old records." I held up the second document, the dissolution notice. "And this," I continued, "is proof that Maplewood Heights HOA was officially dissolved 3 years ago. There is no HOA, which means you aren't president of anything." Gasps erupted. The crowd shifted, whispers turning into exclamations. Karen's face turned scarlet. She shook her head violently, clutching her folder tighter. "Lies! All lies! These are fabricated!" That's when I played my trump card. I pulled out the print shop receipt, holding it high. "This is a receipt from the local print shop, time-stamped last week, witnessed and confirmed by the employee who served you. It shows you had 20 fake boundary maps printed, maps you've been using to trick neighbors into paying fines." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Bob stepped forward. "She fined me $60 for a fake mailbox violation," he said loudly. "And I paid it because I thought she had the power to ruin me." Another neighbor chimed in. She charged me $100 for a fence that was supposedly too tall. One by one, voices rose, the dam breaking, years of frustration spilling into the open. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, her confidence cracking under the weight of collective truth. But still, she fought back. "None of this matters," she shrieked. "I am the HOA president, and you will respect my authority." "This is illegal! Illegal!" Her voice rose to a screech echoing across the cul-de-sac. But now, instead of intimidation, it sounded desperate, unhinged, and then, as if fate itself had written the script, 2 county sheriff's deputies rounded the corner. Someone, maybe Bob, maybe another fed-up neighbor, had called the authorities. And here they were, badges gleaming, walking toward the chaos. "Evening, folks," one deputy said calmly. "We've had multiple reports of a disturbance." Karen pounced immediately, shoving her clipboard toward them. "Officers!" "Arrest this man!" she demanded, pointing at me. "He is illegally occupying his property, defying HOA law, and refusing to comply with regulations." "I am the HOA president, and I demand enforcement." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "we'll need to see your proof of authority." Triumphant, she shoved her manila folder into his hands. "Here, all the documentation you need." The deputy flipped through the papers slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced up at me. "Sir, do you have your ownership documents?" Without hesitation, I handed him my binder. He scanned the official county records, the deed, the dissolution notice. A long pause. Then the deputy turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, these documents," he held up her folder, "are not official. They're copies. And according to county records, Maplewood Heights HOA no longer exists, which means you have no authority here." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's jaw dropped. "What? That's impossible." "I am the president." The deputy shook his head. "Ma'am, you've been issuing fake fines, harassing neighbors, and impersonating an authority that doesn't exist. That's fraud and harassment. And if you don't stop right now, you'll be facing charges." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers, even laughter. But Karen wasn't done. Her face twisted into pure rage, tears welling in her eyes. She snatched her folder back, clutching it like a shield. "No! You don't understand. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. I'm the only thing keeping it together. These people need me." Her voice cracked. She stamped her foot like a child denied a toy. "Illegal! This is illegal!" she screamed, the word echoing into the night. But this time, nobody believed her. Nobody cowered. Nobody paid. Instead, the neighbors she had tormented for years stood taller, emboldened by the truth. "You're finished, Karen," Bob said firmly. "We're done being scared of you." The deputies exchanged a glance. One gently took her arm. "Ma'am, I think it's time you head home before this gets worse." She tried to shake him off, but he held firm. "We'll be in touch about this matter," he added. "And I'd advise you to get legal counsel." Karen's screams faded as they escorted her away, her cries of "Illegal! Illegal!" echoing uselessly into the night. When the deputies left, the crowd turned to me. Some clapped me on the back. Others thanked me for standing up when they hadn't dared. Judy squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. For the first time since moving into the farmhouse, I felt it again. Peace. Not just for me, but for everyone Karen had bullied. Justice wasn't always neat. But tonight it was loud, clear, and undeniable. Karen had built her empire on intimidation and lies. And in one night it all came crashing down. When the sheriff's cruiser disappeared into the night, carrying a sputtering, red-faced Karen in the back seat, the air in Maplewood Heights shifted. It was like the weight of years of intimidation had finally lifted. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now stood taller. Voices that had been silenced by fear began to speak freely again. And me? For the first time since moving into my farmhouse, I felt like the dream I had fought for was real. Peace. Not the fragile peace Karen had enforced with threats and fake fines, but real peace. The kind you get when truth finally cuts through lies. I stood there in the glow of porch lights and street lamps, Judy's hand warm in mine, listening to the neighbors murmur with relief. Bob Wilson, who had been one of Karen's earliest victims, clapped me on the back and said quietly, "You didn't just save your farmhouse, son. You saved this whole street." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Word spread quickly, not just within Maplewood Heights, but throughout the county. People who had been harassed, fined, or intimidated by Karen finally stepped forward. Complaints piled up. Evidence surfaced. And before long, Karen found herself facing not just angry neighbors, but actual legal consequences. Fraud, harassment, extortion, impersonating an official authority. The list of potential charges read like the table of contents from a law school textbook. For years, she had thrived by being the loudest voice in the room, the one who could shout illegal and make people flinch. But now, with cameras, documents, and witnesses stacked against her, her shouting had lost all power. The truth had finally caught up. As for me, I could finally breathe again. I walked across the wide porch of my farmhouse each morning with a coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over fields untouched by HOA restrictions. No bogus notices on the door. No orange fines taped to the mailbox. Just quiet, open land, the exact life I had fought for. Every creak of the farmhouse floorboards, every gust of wind through the tall grass reminded me of why I had chosen this place, freedom. But that freedom came at a cost. It had taken sleepless nights, heated confrontations, hours of research, and a confrontation most people would rather avoid. And it made me realize something bigger. This wasn't just my story. What happened to me is happening to people everywhere. Karen isn't unique. She's just one face in a pattern of HOA abuse. Boards and individuals who stretch their power beyond reason, who manipulate neighbors into compliance, who weaponize fear and paperwork to control lives. Sometimes they hide behind real bylaws. Sometimes, like Karen, they invent rules out of thin air. But the result is the same. Homeowners stripped of peace, forced into battles they never signed up for, and that's why I tell this story. Not just to share what happened to me, but to shine a light on the darker side of HOAs, to show others that they are not alone, and to remind everyone that authority without accountability isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. If there's one thing I learned from this entire ordeal, it's this: bullies don't stop until someone makes them. Whether it's a fake president with a clipboard or an entire board acting above the law, silence only feeds their power. But the moment you speak up, the moment you demand proof, the moment you gather evidence, that's when the balance shifts. That's when the truth wins. And if my story can inspire even one person to stand their ground, to challenge a bogus notice, to question a self-appointed authority, then all the shouting and chaos will have been worth it. Karen's chapter may be closed, but the story of HOA abuse is far from over. Every week, new stories surface. Families fined for harmless choices. Neighbors sued over paint colors, homeowners dragged into legal nightmares by boards that forgot they were meant to serve, not control. That's why this isn't the end. This is just one tale in a much bigger collection. As I sit on my porch tonight, the crickets chirping in the distance, I finally feel what I dreamed of all along. Not just the freedom of owning my farmhouse, but the freedom of knowing I fought for it, and won. And maybe, just maybe, my fight can give someone else the courage to fight too. Because in the end, the truth will always be louder than the lies. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, a power-hungry neighbor, or a Karen screaming illegal at your doorstep, then you're in the right place. This channel, HOA Truth Tales, is where we pull back the curtain on the wild, outrageous, and sometimes unbelievable world of HOAs. It's where real homeowners share real battles. It's where we expose the bullies, the frauds, and the entitled neighbors who think they rule the block. So if you don't want to miss the next jaw-dropping story, hit that subscribe button. Smash the like button if Karen finally getting exposed felt as satisfying to you as it did to me. And share this video with anyone you know who's ever tangled with an HOA. They need to know they're not alone, because together, by telling these stories, we do more than entertain. We shine a light. We warn others. We hold people accountable. And we prove, once and for all, that the truth will always win. Welcome to HOA Truth Tales.